I want to tell you something that might disturb you at first, but I promise you, it will set you free. Right now, as you're listening to my voice, there are invisible hands reaching into your mind. They're not physical hands. They're the hands of systems, of cultures, of people who've convinced you that their opinion about you is more important than God's original intention for you. And the most terrifying part? You've been cooperating with them. You've been opening the door, rolling out the welcome mat, and inviting these thieves to come in and rearrange the furniture of your thinking. Let me be very direct with you. Every single day, someone is trying to control how you think. Your employer wants to control your time. The media wants to control your emotions. Your culture wants to control your values. Even well-meaning family members want to control your decisions. And here's what nobody tells you. The moment you allow another human being to define your reality, you have surrendered the most sacred gift God ever gave you, your mind. I'm not talking about being rebellious or arrogant. I'm talking about something far more profound. I'm talking about understanding that you were created with an internal navigation system, a divine consciousness, a manufacturer's manual written into the fabric of your soul. And when you ignore that to follow the crowd, you don't just lose your way, you lose yourself. You see, manipulation isn't always obvious. It doesn't always come with a villain's mustache and an evil laugh. Most of the time, manipulation comes disguised as concern. It comes dressed up as tradition. It whispers to you in the voice of people you love and says things like, "This is just how we do things here," or "Who do you think you are to be different?" or my personal favorite, "You're being too sensitive, too intense, too much." But let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. If God created you as an original, why are you working so hard to become a copy? If the creator of the universe placed specific dreams, specific gifts, specific visions inside of you, why are you asking permission from people who can't even see what you see? I've watched it happen thousands of times. Brilliant minds reduced to echoes. Powerful voices silenced by doubt. World changers sitting in corners because somebody convinced them they weren't qualified, weren't ready, weren't enough. And today, right now, in this moment, I want to teach you how to build a mind so strong, so anchored, so unshakable that manipulation cannot find a foothold. Not because you're stubborn, but because you're certain. Not because you're closed-minded, but because you know who you are and whose you are. This isn't just motivation, this is liberation. This is about taking back the territory of your mind and defending it like your life depends on it. Because it does. Now here's where most people get stuck. They think freedom from negativity means running away from the world. I'll just avoid negative people. I'll just stay away from bad news. I'll just isolate myself until everything feels better. No, that's not strength. That's fear dressed up as wisdom. Real mental freedom isn't about hiding. It's about building immunity. It's about developing such a strong internal environment that when negativity does show up, and it will, it can't take root. It bounces off. It has nowhere to grow. Think about your physical body for a moment. You don't become healthy by living in a sterile bubble, do you? No. You build your immune system. You expose yourself strategically. You strengthen from the inside out. Your mind works the same way. Every single day, you're building either immunity or vulnerability. Every thought you entertain, every conversation you engage in, every piece of content you consume, you're either strengthening your mental defenses or weakening them. And here's the key you get to choose. I'm not talking about positive thinking. I'm talking about purposeful thinking. There's a massive difference. Positive thinking says everything is fine, everything is wonderful, nothing bad exists. That's denial. That's dangerous. Purposeful thinking says, I see the challenge. I acknowledge the difficulty. But I refuse to let it define my reality or dictate my response. You see the distinction? One is pretending, the other is power. When you think with purpose, you're not ignoring the storm. You're building a foundation that can withstand it. You're not denying the existence of negativity. You're denying it permission to control you. This is what separates people who survive from people who thrive. Survivors react, thrivers respond. Survivors are tossed around by every negative circumstance. Thrivers have an anchor. They have a center. They have a mental framework that holds steady when everything around them is chaos. And that framework, it's built thought by thought. decision by decision, boundary by boundary. Let me give you something practical. Starting today, I want you to conduct what I call a thought audit. For the next 24 hours, just notice, don't judge yourself, just observe. How many times do you replay a criticism? How many times do you rehearse a worst-case scenario? How many times do you allow someone else's mood to hijack yours? Just notice. Because awareness is the first step to authority. You cannot change what you don't acknowledge. You see, most people think acknowledgement is about beating yourself up. They think, oh, I have to admit I'm a failure. I have to confess I'm weak. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Acknowledgement is simply saying, this is where I am right now, not where I should be, not where I wish I were, not where others think I ought to be, but where I actually am. There's tremendous power in that honesty. Because when you stop pretending, you stop wasting energy. Think about it. How much mental and emotional energy do you burn every day maintaining a facade? How exhausting is it to keep up appearances, to project confidence you don't feel, to smile through the pain, to act like you've got it all together when inside you're falling apart? That energy could be redirected. That energy could be invested in actual growth, in real change, in genuine transformation. But as long as you're using it to maintain the illusion, you remain stuck. I've watched this happen over and over again. I've counseled leaders who were privately desperate but publicly invincible. I've mentored ministers who were spiritually dry but still preaching water. I've coached entrepreneurs who were financially broken but still flashing the symbols of success. And in every case, the breakthrough didn't come until they got honest. Not honest with everyone. You don't need to broadcast your struggles to the world. But honest with yourself. Honest with God. Honest with at least one trusted person who can walk with you through the process. Because here's what happens when you acknowledge your current reality. You create space for something new. You see, as long as you're denying the problem, you're also blocking the solution. The solution can't get in because there's no room. You've filled that space with pretense. But the moment you say, I acknowledge this pattern, I see what I've been doing, I recognize how I got here. In that moment, you've just opened a door. You've created a gap. And into that gap, wisdom can flow, strategy can enter, divine guidance can come, help can arrive. This is why the scripture says, confess your faults one to another that you may be healed. Not that you may be condemned, not that you may be judged, that you may be healed. Acknowledgement is the beginning of healing. You know, I've watched people carry wounds for decades that could have been healed in moments if they had just been honest about them. I've seen marriages dissolve not because the offense was too great, but because the acknowledgement came too late. I've watched ministries crumble, businesses fail, friendships end, not because reconciliation was impossible, but because someone chose pride over honesty. Let me tell you something powerful. The wound that you expose is the wound that God can heal. The wound you hide becomes infected. It becomes toxic. It poisons everything around it. I remember counseling a man once, successful businessman, pillar of his community, respected in his church. But there was this distance between him and his adult son. You could feel it in the room. 20 years of coldness, 20 years of formal conversations and obligatory phone calls. And when I asked him what happened, he said, nothing happened, we just grew apart. But that's never really true, is it? People don't just grow apart, something happens, always. It took 3 sessions before he finally admitted it. His son had wanted to be an artist, and he had mocked that dream, called it foolish, forced his son into business school, withheld approval until the boy conformed. And the son did conform outwardly, but inwardly something broke. Something died. The relationship became a transaction, professional, polite, empty. And here's what struck me. The father knew this. He had known it for 20 years, but he had never said the words, I was wrong, I hurt you, I'm sorry. Why? Because acknowledgement feels like weakness. Acknowledgement feels like losing. But here's the truth. Acknowledgement is actually strength. It takes more courage to say I was wrong than to defend yourself for a lifetime. When I finally got him to acknowledge it, not to me, but to his son, everything changed. I watched a 70-year-old man weep in his 50-year-old son's arms. I watched decades of ice melt in an afternoon, all because someone finally told the truth. The truth didn't destroy their relationship. The lies were already doing that. The truth gave them something to rebuild on. And that's what most people don't understand about truth-telling. They think it's the nuclear option. They think it's the thing that ends relationships. But I've watched lies end more relationships than truth ever could. Because here's what lies do. They create distance. They create what I call the space between. You're sitting right next to someone, but there's this invisible canyon between you. You're talking, but you're not connecting. You're together, but you're alone. And you can feel it. Both of you can feel it. But nobody names it. Nobody acknowledges it. You just keep pretending that everything's fine while the space between you grows wider every single day. I've counseled marriages where husband and wife haven't had a real conversation in 20 years. 20 years of living together, sharing a bed, raising children, but they're strangers. Why? Because somewhere along the way, they stopped telling the truth. They started managing each other's feelings. They started protecting each other from reality. And in trying to protect each other, they lost each other. You cannot build intimacy on a foundation of lies. You just can't. Intimacy requires truth. It requires vulnerability. It requires the courage to show up as you actually are, not as you think the other person wants you to be. And that's terrifying. Because when you show up as you actually are, they might not like what they see. They might reject you. They might leave. And that's the risk. That's always the risk. But here's the alternative. You hide who you really are. You pretend. You perform. And they fall in love with your mask. They fall in love with your performance. They fall in love with the person you're pretending to be. And now you're trapped because you got what you wanted. You got their love, but you didn't get what you needed. You didn't get to be known. You didn't get to be seen. You got their love, but you know it's not really for you. It's for the character you're playing. And that's the loneliest place in the world. To be loved for who you're not. To be celebrated for a life you're not actually living. To be admired for achievements that are slowly crushing you. I've watched people work themselves into hospital beds chasing validation. I've sat with leaders who built empires but lost their souls. I've counseled individuals who achieved everything society told them to want, only to realize they sacrificed everything God designed them to be. And here's what breaks my heart. Some of you are doing it right now. You're reading this and somewhere deep inside you feel it. That exhaustion, that quiet desperation, that sense that you're living someone else's dream while your own purpose dies in silence. Let me tell you something that might sting but could also set you free. Your pretending isn't just hurting you, it's robbing the world of what only you can give. Because listen carefully, when you abandon your true self to become what others expect, you don't just lose yourself. You deprive humanity of a unique expression of divine purpose that can never be replicated. Your authentic contribution gets buried under layers of performance and pretense. Think about it. How much creativity dies because people are afraid it won't be conventional enough? How many innovations never happened because someone was too busy maintaining an image to take the risk? How many relationships remain shallow because both people are too afraid to be real? The world doesn't need another copy. We have enough people trying to be the next somebody else. What we desperately need is the first you, the real you. The you that God invested with specific gifts, particular passions, unique perspectives that no one else can offer. I've seen this in my own journey. Early in my ministry, I tried to sound like the preachers I admired. I copied their cadence, their phrases, their style. And you know what happened? My impact was limited. My message felt hollow. People could sense something was off. It wasn't until I found my own voice, my own way of communicating truth, that things changed. Not because I became better than those I admired, but because I became authentically me. And authenticity always carries more power than performance. Now, let me tell you something that most people never realize. Asterisk, asterisk. Your uniqueness is not an accident. It's an assignment. Asterisk, asterisk. The very things that make you different, the experiences that shaped you, the perspective that only you carry, these aren't obstacles to overcome. They're the tools you've been given for the work only you can do. When you spend your life trying to sound like someone else, move like someone else, think like someone else, you're actually stealing from the world. You're withholding the one thing nobody else can offer. Asterisk, asterisk, you. Asterisk, asterisk. I've watched countless people suffocate their own potential because they were too busy studying someone else's success formula. They read every book, attend every seminar, memorize every principle, and then wonder why it doesn't work for them the same way. Here's why. Asterisk, asterisk. You can learn principles, but you cannot clone purpose. Asterisk, asterisk. You can adopt strategies, but you cannot duplicate destiny. Think about it this way. If I take a seed from an oak tree and plant it in the ground, what am I going to get? An oak tree. Not a pine tree with oak characteristics. Not an oak tree trying to be a maple. A full, complete, unapologetic oak tree. Why? Because the oak seed contains oak information. Everything it needs to become what it was designed to be is already encoded within it. You are the same way. Before you ever picked up a book or listened to a teaching, you already carried within you a divine blueprint. The question isn't, how can I become like them? The question is, asterisk, asterisk, what am I carrying that the world is waiting for? Asterisk, asterisk. I remember speaking to a young minister once who was deeply discouraged. He said, Dr. Munroe, I've been preaching for 3 years and nothing's happening. I studied the great preachers. I copied their cadence, their structure, even their gestures. But the anointing just isn't there. I looked at him and said, asterisk, asterisk. Stop trying to be anointed like them. Start being obedient as you. Asterisk, asterisk. 6 months later, he called me with tears in his voice. His ministry had exploded not because he became a better copy, but because he finally had the courage to be an original. That phone call reminded me of something crucial. Asterisk, asterisk. The graveyard is not just full of unused gifts. It's full of unused originals. Asterisk, asterisk. It's full of people who spent their entire lives rehearsing someone else's lines instead of writing their own story. And here's what breaks my heart. Many of you watching this right now are doing the exact same thing. You're not times living times your life. You're times auditioning times for it. You're waiting for someone to give you permission to be who God already made you. Let me tell you something that might sting a little. Asterisk, asterisk. Nobody is coming to validate you. Asterisk, asterisk. Nobody is going to tap you on the shoulder and say, okay, now you can start being yourself. That validation? It has to come from within. It has to come from knowing times, truly knowing times, that your assignment was settled before you took your first breath. I remember meeting a young woman who had a revolutionary idea for helping homeless families. She'd mapped it out, researched it, even had potential donors interested. But she kept waiting. Waiting for what? I'm waiting for a sign, she told me. I'm waiting to feel ready. I said to her what I'm saying to you right now. Asterisk, asterisk. The graveyard is full of people who died waiting to feel ready. Asterisk, asterisk. Readiness is not a feeling. It's a decision. It's action in the face of uncertainty. You see, the enemy's greatest weapon isn't opposition, it's delay. He doesn't have to stop you if he can just get you to stop yourself. If he can get you to wait 1 more year, attend 1 more seminar, get 1 more degree, lose 10 more pounds, asterisk, then times you'll start. But I'm here to tell you that mindset is the greatest trap the enemy has ever laid. Because you know what that is? That's the spirit of delay. That's the spirit of procrastination. That's the spirit of perfectionism. And none of those spirits are from God. God didn't call the perfect. He called the times willing asterisk. He didn't choose Moses because he was eloquent. Moses had a speech impediment. He didn't choose David because he was battle ready. David was a shepherd boy with a slingshot. He didn't choose Peter because he was stable. Peter was impulsive and emotional. God doesn't wait for you to be perfect. He waits for you to be times available asterisk. And here's what breaks my heart. While you're sitting on the sidelines saying, I'm not ready, someone else is out there living the life you were supposed to live. Someone else is writing the book you were supposed to write. Someone else is starting the business you were supposed to start. Someone else is mentoring the young person you were supposed to reach. Your delay is not just affecting you, it's affecting times, generations, asterisk. Because everything God planted in you was designed to be a solution for somebody else. Your gift, your talent, your idea, your story, it's not just for you. It's for the single mother who needs encouragement. It's for the young man who's about to give up. It's for the community that's waiting for someone to step up. And while you're waiting to feel ready, they're still waiting for their answer. That's heavy. I know that's heavy, but it's true. So what do we do? How do we break this cycle? We start by redefining what readiness actually means. See, readiness is not about having everything figured out. Readiness is about being times responsive times to God's voice right now. It's not, do I have all the resources? It's, am I willing to take the first step with what I have? It's not, do I feel confident? It's, do I trust the one who called me? And let me tell you something, readiness looks different than you think. You think readiness means you're polished. God says readiness means your time's pliable asterisk. You think readiness means you've arrived. God says readiness means your time's available asterisk. You think readiness means you have no questions. God says readiness means you trust Him times through times the questions. I've watched people wait their entire lives for the perfect moment to step into their purpose. And you know what happened? The moment passed them by. Not because God changed His mind, but because they confused times preparation times with times paralysis asterisk. There's a difference between wisdom and fear dressed up as wisdom. There's a difference between patience and procrastination disguised as spirituality. See, the enemy doesn't mind you knowing your purpose. What he fears is you times, walking times in it. So he'll whisper, not yet, you're not ready yet. Wait until you have more education, more money, more connections, more confidence. And before you know it, decades have passed and you're still waiting. But God is saying to someone watching this right now, now is your time. Not when you feel ready. Not when circumstances are perfect. Not when people finally believe in you. Now. Because here's what I've learned. God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. Your adequacy doesn't come from your resume. It comes from your times, relationship times with the one who authored your assignment. Moses had a speech impediment. God used him to deliver the most powerful message to the most powerful man on earth. David had no military training. God used him to defeat the giant that paralyzed an entire army. Esther was an orphan with no political power. God positioned her to save an entire nation. Your lack is not disqualifying you. Your weakness is the very place where God's strength shows up most clearly. So stop waiting to feel adequate. Stop waiting for permission from people who can't see what God has placed inside you. The clock is ticking. Not to pressure you, but to awaken you. This is your season. This is your moment. And readiness isn't something you achieve, it's something you times choose asterisk. Right now, you can choose to be ready. You can choose to say, yes, Lord, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm available. Use me. When you make yourself available, God begins to work with what you have, not with what you don't have. He doesn't wait until you're perfect. He doesn't wait until you have all the resources. He starts right where you are. Remember Moses at the burning bush? God asked him, what's in your hand? Moses looked down and saw a simple shepherd's staff, nothing special, just a stick he used every day to guide sheep. But when Moses surrendered that ordinary stick to God's extraordinary purpose, it became the rod that divided the Red Sea, brought water from a rock, and demonstrated God's power before Pharaoh. What's in your hand right now? What ordinary thing are you holding that God wants to transform into something extraordinary? Maybe it's a skill you think is too common. Maybe it's a relationship you've overlooked. Maybe it's a passion you've dismissed as impractical. God specializes in taking the ordinary and making it holy, taking the common and making it consecrated. You see, availability is more valuable than ability in God's economy. The most gifted person who refuses to be used accomplishes nothing. But the willing heart, even with limited skill, becomes a channel for divine power. I've watched this principle play out countless times. I've seen people with basic education transform communities because they were available. I've seen individuals with stammering speech inspire thousands because they said yes to God. The world is not waiting for your perfection, it's groaning for your participation. And here's what happens when you make yourself available. God begins to enlarge your capacity. He stretches you. He takes you beyond your comfort zone, because purpose always requires growth. If you could accomplish your assignment with your current knowledge and skills, it wouldn't require faith. God deliberately calls you to things that are bigger than you so that when it succeeds, everyone knows it was Him, not just you. Think about it. If David had fought Goliath with Saul's armor and sword, people might have credited Saul's equipment. But when a shepherd boy defeated a giant with a sling and a stone, everyone knew God showed up. This is why inadequacy can be a gift. Your weakness becomes the stage for God's strength. Your inability becomes the canvas for His ability. When you're stripped of everything you thought would help you succeed, the credentials, the connections, the confidence, that's when God gets the glory he deserves. I've watched this pattern repeat itself throughout history and in my own life. Every time God promoted me to a new level, I felt completely unqualified. When I was asked to speak to world leaders, I thought, I'm just a kid from the Bahamas. What do I know about advising presidents and prime ministers? But that's precisely why God chose that moment. Because when those leaders listened and transformation happened, nobody could credit my eloquence or my credentials. They had to acknowledge God's hand. You see, God doesn't need your ability. He's looking for your availability. He doesn't need your perfection. He needs your permission. He's not calling the qualified. He's qualifying the called. And that changes everything about how you view your current limitations. When Moses stood at the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind him and water in front of him, he had no solution. He had no military training for this moment. He had no engineering degree to build a bridge. He had nothing but a rod in his hand and a promise from God. And that was enough. Because God specializes in showing up where man runs out. Here's what I need you to understand. Your inadequacy is not a disqualification, it's an invitation. It's God saying, step aside and watch what I can do with your yes. The moment you say, God, I can't do this, but I'm willing to try, you've positioned yourself for a miracle. You've created space for the supernatural to invade the natural. I meet so many people who are waiting to feel ready before they obey God. They say, when I'm more qualified, when I have more experience, when I'm more confident, then I'll step out. But that day never comes, because growth doesn't happen in the waiting room. It happens in the arena. You don't get stronger by avoiding the weight. You get stronger by lifting it, even when it feels too heavy. God gave you a dream that requires him because he wants a relationship with you, not just results through you. And that's the part most people miss. They want the blessing without the relationship. They want the provision without the presence. They want the miracle without the intimacy. But God says, I'm not just interested in what you do for me, I'm interested in doing it with you. You see, the journey to your dream is actually more important than the destination. Because on the journey, you discover who God is. You learn his character. You experience his faithfulness. You develop the capacity to carry what he promised. Think about the children of Israel. God could have taken them to the promised land in 11 days. 11 days. But instead, it took them 40 years. Why? Because the journey wasn't just about getting to Canaan. It was about transforming slaves into a nation. It was about removing Egypt from their hearts. It was about teaching them to trust a God they couldn't see instead of depending on a Pharaoh they could. The same is true for you. God isn't delaying your dream to frustrate you. He's developing you in the delay. Every closed door is teaching you discernment. Every financial struggle is teaching you dependence. Every rejection is teaching you that your identity isn't in people's approval, it's in his acceptance. I remember when I was trying to build our first ministry facility, we had the vision, we had the plans, we had the excitement, but we didn't have the money, and doors kept closing, loans denied, donors backed out. I was frustrated. I told God, why did you give me this vision if you weren't going to provide? And in that quiet moment, he spoke to my spirit. Myles, I'm not withholding provision. I'm building your faith. Because when this building finally stands, I want you to know beyond doubt that I did it. Not your connections, not your cleverness, but me. That's when I understood. God doesn't just want to give you your dream. He wants you to know him as the dream giver. He wants you so dependent on him that when the breakthrough comes, you can't take credit for it. You can only worship him for it. So when your dream feels delayed, don't get discouraged. Get curious. Ask God, what are you trying to teach me in this season? What part of my character are you developing? What dimension of your nature are you revealing? Because when you understand the lesson in the wait stops feeling like a prison and starts feeling like preparation. I've watched people waste their waiting seasons. They waste them on bitterness. They waste them on distractions. They waste them binge-watching series, scrolling endlessly through social media, numbing themselves with entertainment that adds nothing to their purpose. And then they wonder why, when their breakthrough finally comes, they're not ready for it. You cannot afford to waste your waiting season. Joseph didn't waste his. In prison, he developed a reputation. He became known as a man of integrity, a man who interpreted dreams, a man who carried the presence of God even in the darkest places. So when Pharaoh needed someone, Joseph's name came up. The waiting season made him famous in the right circles before his promotion made him famous to the world. David didn't waste his. In the wilderness, he built a mighty army. He learned leadership. He wrote psalms that would encourage billions. He developed a relationship with God so intimate that God called him a man after my own heart. Your waiting season is your most valuable season if you know what to do with it. This is the season to read the books you've been putting off. This is the season to develop the skills your dream requires. This is the season to heal from the wounds you've been ignoring. This is the season to build the character that your calling demands. Because here's what most people don't realize. God often delays our breakthrough not because we're not ready for the blessing, but because we're not ready for the weight that comes with it. Every promotion comes with new pressure. Every new level comes with new devils. Every elevation comes with increased responsibility. And if your character hasn't been developed in private, you will embarrass yourself in public. I've seen it happen too many times. People pray for years for a certain position, and when they finally get it, they lose it within months because they weren't prepared for it. They had the skill but not the character. They had the talent but not the temperament. They had the gift but not the discipline. The waiting season is where God develops the internal capacity for external opportunity. So stop rushing it. Stop trying to microwave what God is slow cooking. Stop trying to force doors that God has purposely kept closed for your protection. Because here's what I've discovered. The delay is not a denial. The waiting is not wasted time. Every single day that you feel like nothing is happening, God is doing something profound beneath the surface. You know what farmers understand that we've forgotten? They know that you can't rush a harvest. You plant in one season, you water faithfully, you protect the soil, and then you wait. You don't dig up the seed every week to check if it's growing. You don't stand in the field screaming at the ground, "Why aren't you producing yet?" You trust the process. You trust the seasons. You trust that what's happening underground is preparing for what will eventually break through above ground. And that's exactly where you are right now. You're in the underground season. The seed of your promise has been planted. The potential is there. The DNA of your destiny is encoded in that seed. But it needs time. It needs the right conditions. It needs the darkness of the soil before it can handle the brightness of the sun. Listen to me. Everything that grows too fast dies too fast. Bamboo that shoots up overnight has shallow roots and falls in the first storm. But the oak tree spends years developing its root system before it ever shows impressive growth above ground. And once it's established, it can withstand anything. Hurricanes, droughts, centuries of seasons, it remains standing. God is not building your life for temporary applause. He's building it for lasting impact. He's not developing you for a moment of fame. He's developing you for generations of influence. And that kind of foundation cannot be rushed. I remember talking to a young minister years ago who was frustrated because his church wasn't growing fast enough. He looked at mega churches and thought God had forgotten about him. I told him, "Son, you're not ready for what you're asking for." He didn't like hearing that, but it was true. 3 years later, he came back to me with tears in his eyes. He said, "Dr. Munroe, if God had given me what I was praying for back then, it would have destroyed me. I didn't have the character to handle it. I didn't have the wisdom to sustain it. I didn't have the spiritual maturity to steward it." That's the revelation. God's delays are protecting you from blessings you're not yet ready to carry. Let me tell you something that will change the way you see your waiting season forever. God is not withholding from you. He's times preparing, times you. There's a massive difference. When my children were young, I didn't let them handle sharp knives in the kitchen. Was I being cruel? Was I denying them? No. I was protecting them until their hands were strong enough, their judgment mature enough, their coordination developed enough to handle what could either feed them or harm them. The same knife that feeds a mature person can wound a child. And beloved, the same is true with the blessings of God. The same business that would prosper a prepared person would bankrupt someone with poor character. The same platform that would amplify a humble person would destroy someone still struggling with pride. The same wealth that would empower a wise steward would enslave someone who hasn't dealt with their appetite for material things. So when you're crying out, God, why not now? Why not me? Understand this. He's not saying no. He's saying not yet, because I love you too much to give you something that would destroy you. I've watched it happen too many times. I've seen people get what they prayed for, only to lose everything because the blessing arrived before the character did. I've seen ministries explode in growth, then implode in scandal, not because God wasn't with them at the beginning, but because they never developed the integrity to sustain what God initiated. I've seen marriages people beg for turn into nightmares because they never dealt with their own brokenness first. I've seen financial breakthroughs become traps because people never learned the discipline of stewardship. The crisis isn't in the delay. The crisis is in premature arrival. Think about fruit for a moment. If you pick an apple before it's ripe, it's bitter. It looks like an apple, but it doesn't have the sweetness it was designed to carry. Timing doesn't just affect when you get something, it affects what times you get. A premature blessing is a bitter blessing. And here's the tragedy, most people don't know the difference between a premature blessing and a mature one until it's too late. They bite into that green apple and wonder why their mouths are full of bitterness. They rush into the marriage and wonder why there's no peace. They grab the promotion and wonder why they're drowning in responsibilities they can't handle. You see, God doesn't withhold blessings to punish you. He delays them to protect you. He's not keeping good things from you. He's keeping you times for times the good things. There's a maturity that must happen in you before certain blessings can happen times through times you. Think about a woman who's pregnant. That baby is a blessing, yes? But what if she decided she was tired of waiting and wanted to deliver at 5 months? I'm ready now. I don't want to wait anymore. You would call that insanity. Why? Because you understand that there's a biological timing that cannot be violated without consequence. That baby needs 9 months, not because God is being mean, but because that's what's required for the blessing to be fully formed. Your destiny works the same way. There's a gestation period. There's a season of formation that you cannot skip, no matter how impatient you become. And if you force your way out of the womb of preparation prematurely, you won't just be underdeveloped, you might not survive at all. I've watched too many people abort their destiny because they wouldn't wait for God's timing. They saw the promise, they felt the calling, but they couldn't endure the process. So they manufactured their own opportunity. They created their own platform. They opened their own door. And yes, they got times, but it wasn't the times, fullness times of what God had prepared. You can have the right thing at the wrong time and it becomes the wrong thing. Listen to me carefully. Times, even a God-given vision can become an idol if you pursue it outside of God's timing, asterisk. Even the promise can become a trap if you grab it before you're ready to steward it. That's why so many people are frustrated with blessings they prayed for. They begged God for that business, but when they got it, they weren't prepared for it. They cried out for that marriage, but when it came, they didn't have the character to maintain it. They wanted the platform, but when they received it, they didn't have the message mature enough to sustain it. And now they're trapped by the very thing they thought would liberate them. I've watched people lose themselves in the pursuit of their promise. They become so obsessed with the destination that they bypass the preparation. They skip the wilderness because it doesn't look like progress. They avoid the fire because it feels like failure. But let me tell you something that will revolutionize how you see your life times the wilderness. Is the promise in development, asterisk. The fire is, the vision being refined. The delay is, the preparation being perfected. You're not being punished, you're being prepared. You're not being denied, you're being developed. You're not being overlooked, you're being overseen by a God who loves you too much to give you something that would destroy you. See, God is more committed to your maturity than your comfort. He's more interested in your character than your convenience. And sometimes the greatest gift He gives you is not what you ask for, it's the time you spend waiting for it. Because in that waiting room, transformation happens. In that holding pattern, humility is developed. In that season of silence, sensitivity to His voice is sharpened. Let me give you another principle. Asterisk. The quality of your preparation determines the capacity of your manifestation. Asterisk. If God gives you $1 billion vision, but you only have $1,000 character, that vision will crush you. If He entrusts you with a multinational influence, but you haven't mastered faithfulness in your local assignment, that influence will corrupt you. I'm telling you this because I need you to stop despising the small beginnings. Stop being ashamed of the hidden years. Stop apologizing for the season where nobody knows your name. David wasn't ready to be king the day Samuel anointed him. He was ready the day Saul died after years of running, hiding, worshiping in caves, and leading broken men with a pure heart. God doesn't waste your winters. He uses them. Every cold season, every silent night, every moment when heaven seemed closed and your prayers bounced back. Those weren't accidents. Those were appointments. You were being processed. See, preparation and promotion are not the same thing. Preparation happens in private. Promotion happens in public. But you cannot handle public promotion without private preparation. This is why so many people get the opportunity and lose it quickly. They wanted the platform without the process. They wanted the stage without the schooling. They wanted the crown without the character development. Let me tell you something that will shift your perspective. Your current limitation is not your punishment, it's your protection. God is hiding you until you become who you need to be to sustain what He's about to give you. The treasure is too valuable to trust to an immature version of you. I know people right now who are angry at God because their business hasn't blown up yet. They see others with less skill making more money and they're frustrated. But what they don't realize is that if God gave them that level of exposure right now, it would destroy them. Their character can't carry that weight yet. Their integrity hasn't been tested at that altitude. Their humility hasn't been refined in that fire. Think about lottery winners. Statistics show that most of them end up broke within a few years. Why? Because they got wealth without the wisdom to manage it. They got the reward without the responsibility training. Money simply amplified who they already were, and who they were wasn't ready for what they received. This is why God makes you wait. Not because He's cruel, but because He's careful. He's developing in you the internal capacity to handle the external opportunity. He's building furniture in your soul that can hold the weight of your destiny. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness learning to lead sheep before God, trusted Him with leading people. Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity before 3 years in ministry. Paul spent years in Arabia after his Damascus Road experience before he started his missionary journeys. Every giant you're called to face requires a specific weapon that can only be forged in a specific season. David couldn't kill Goliath with Saul's armor. He needed the sling, and that sling was mastered during the lonely, unnoticed years of shepherding. The very thing that seemed like wasted time was actually weapon preparation. So when you look at your life right now and feel like you're behind, I need you to reframe that thought. You're not behind, you're being prepared. Think about the seed again. Before it produces fruit, it must be buried. Before it produces a harvest, it must be hidden. Before it brings forth life, it must first appear to die. That's not punishment, that's process. That's not rejection, that's preparation. And what's happening in the darkness of that soil is more important than what's visible above ground. The roots are developing. The foundation is being established. The strength is being built. And when that seed finally breaks through the surface, it doesn't come up apologizing for taking so long. It doesn't compare itself to the tree that's been there for years. It simply begins its journey with everything it developed underground. Your delay has been your development. Your waiting has been your strengthening. Your silence has been your classroom. And now I need you to shift from feeling punished to feeling privileged. Because not everyone gets this level of preparation. Not everyone receives this depth of training. Not everyone is being groomed for what you're being groomed for. See, God doesn't waste time on small assignments. He doesn't invest years of preparation for minor purposes. The length of your preparation is directly proportional to the size of your assignment. If He's taking this long to prepare you, it's because what He's preparing you for requires this level of readiness. Joseph spent 13 years between the pit and the palace. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading a nation. Paul spent 3 years in Arabia after his conversion. Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity before 3 years of ministry. Your preparation period is not an indication of God's forgetfulness, it's a revelation of your assignment's significance. So I'm asking you today to change your perspective. Stop looking at your waiting as wasted time. Stop viewing your preparation as punishment. Stop comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. Your story is unfolding exactly as it should. Your timing is perfect for your purpose. Your season is aligned with your assignment. And while you're waiting, you're not idle, you're being filled. While you're delayed, you're not forgotten, you're being fashioned. While you're hidden, you're not abandoned, you're being fortified. Everything you need for where you're going is being developed in where you are. The place of preparation is sacred ground. It's where God does his most important work, not in you, but times on times you. See, most people want the platform before they've developed the character. They want the position before they've cultivated the integrity. They want the influence before they've built the foundation. But God doesn't operate that way. He's not interested in your reputation, he's interested in your character. Because reputation is what men think you are, but character is what God knows you are. And here's what I've learned. The size of your assignment determines the length of your preparation. If God has called you to something small, the preparation is brief. But if he's called you to something significant, something that will impact generations, the preparation will be extensive. It will be thorough. It will be uncomfortable. Because God refuses to put his glory on display through a vessel that hasn't been properly prepared. You see this pattern throughout Scripture. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he could lead for 40 years. Joseph spent 13 years in obscurity before he could reign for 80. David was anointed king as a teenager, but didn't wear the crown until he was 30. The gap between your anointing and your appointing is called preparation. And that gap is not wasted time, it's invested time. Think about it. Jesus himself spent 30 years in preparation for 3 years of ministry. The Son of God, who had nothing to learn and nothing to overcome, still submitted to the process of preparation. Why? To teach us that rushing the process produces immature leaders. Shortcuts create weak foundations. And when the storms come, and they will come, only those who've been properly prepared will remain standing. So if you're in a season where nothing makes sense, where doors keep closing, where you feel stuck in the same place, understand this: you're not stuck, you're planted. And there's a profound difference. Stuck things die in their position. Planted things grow in their position. The question is not where you are, but times what you're becoming, times where you are. You know, I've watched people all over the world, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in the Caribbean, and I've noticed something fascinating. The people who never move physically often become the most creative, the most innovative, the most spiritually deep. Why? Because they had no other option but to dig where they were. When you can't run to another location, you start mining the location you're in. When you can't change your address, you start changing your attitude. When you can't relocate your body, you start renovating your mind. This is why some of the greatest inventions came from people in limiting circumstances. This is why some of the most powerful ministries emerged from people who couldn't travel. This is why some of the deepest philosophies were written by people in prison cells. Paul wrote most of the New Testament from prison. John received the book of Revelation on an isolated island. Joseph interpreted dreams that would change nations from a prison cell. Moses got the 10 Commandments on a mountain he never wanted to climb. Their location didn't determine their revelation. Their confinement didn't limit their assignment. Their restriction became the very womb of their contribution to humanity. And here's what I need you to understand today. Asterisk. Your restriction is not your rejection, asterisk. God has not forgotten you because you're still in the same place. He has not overlooked you because others have moved on. He has not abandoned you because your circumstances haven't changed. In fact, the opposite might be true. He trusts you enough to keep you there until you've extracted everything that location has to teach you. He values you enough to root you deeply before he promotes you publicly. He loves you enough to develop your character in private before he displays your gift in public. You see, shallow roots produce quick results but short legacies. Deep roots produce slow growth but lasting impact. And deep roots require time. They require seasons. They require you to stay long enough in one place that your roots can push through the hard soil, wrap around the hidden rocks, and tap into the underground streams. I've watched people uproot themselves every time things get uncomfortable, every time the pressure mounts, every time growth starts to hurt, and then they wonder why they never bear lasting fruit. Friend, you cannot keep transplanting yourself and expect to flourish. There's a principle in nature that applies to destiny. What you keep moving, you keep shallow. Your roots grow deep not when everything is perfect, but when you decide to stay planted even when the soil feels hard, even when the season feels long, even when you can't see what's happening beneath the surface. The strongest trees aren't the ones that grew in ideal conditions. They're the ones that had to push their roots deeper to find water during the drought. This is why instant success is often a curse in disguise. It robs you of the deep root system you need to sustain long-term impact. I've seen ministries explode overnight and collapse just as quickly. I've watched businesses boom without foundation and crumble under their own weight. Why? Because there was fruit without roots. There was visibility without depth. There was platform without preparation. God is not impressed by your speed. He's committed to your depth. He would rather you arrive late with character than early with talent alone. He would rather build you slowly and thoroughly than promote you quickly and watch you fall. The wilderness wasn't wasting Moses, it was rooting him. The prison wasn't destroying Joseph, it was deepening him. The shepherd's field wasn't limiting David, it was grounding him. So when you feel stuck, ask yourself, am I being buried or am I being planted? Because they look remarkably similar in the beginning. Both involve darkness, both involve pressure, both involve being covered by circumstances you didn't choose. But burial ends in death, while planting ends in harvest. The difference isn't in the situation, it's in the purpose. And if God is the one who positioned you there, then friend, you're not buried, you're planted. And what's happening in the darkness is more important than anything people can see in the light. Stop measuring your progress by what's visible above ground. Some of the most critical growth in your life is happening in secret, in the unseen places, in the character development nobody's applauding, in the obedience nobody's recording, in the faithfulness that doesn't trend on social media. That's where your real legacy is being built. You see, I've watched people chase platforms their entire lives. They go from conference to conference, from stage to stage, from opportunity to opportunity, thinking that's where their authority is being established. But they never stop long enough to let God build something deep inside them. They never stay in one place long enough for roots to go down. They're always looking for the next big break, the next viral moment, the next chance to be seen. And they wonder why their influence evaporates the moment the cameras turn off. Let me tell you something about real authority. Real authority is built in obscurity. It's forged in the furnace of faithfulness when nobody's watching. It's developed in the discipline of doing the right thing over and over again, even when there's no immediate reward. Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity before 3 years in ministry. 30 years of carpentry. 30 years of just being the son of a carpenter. 30 years of what looked like wasted potential to everyone around him. Can you imagine the Son of God, the Savior of the world, making tables and chairs in a small town that nobody cared about? But those 30 years weren't wasted. Those 30 years were necessary. They were building something in his character that the 3 years of ministry would require. They were developing a capacity that the assignment would demand. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness tending sheep before he could lead God's people. 40 years of obscurity. 40 years of what looked like failure. He went from being a prince in Pharaoh's house to being a shepherd in the middle of nowhere. That looked like a demotion, didn't it? That looked like his life was over. But God was preparing him. God was breaking the Egypt out of him. God was teaching him patience with sheep so he could lead people. God was developing in him the capacity to hear the voice of God in solitude so he could speak the word of God to a nation. David spent years in caves running from Saul before he sat on a throne. Years of hiding. Years of being hunted. Years of feeling like God's promise would never come to pass. He had been anointed king, but he was living like a fugitive. He had the title, but he was in a cave. But those cave years were essential. Those years of waiting taught him dependence on God. Those years of running developed in him a worship life that would sustain him through the challenges of kingship. The caves didn't just hide David, they transformed him. When he entered those caves, he was running for his life. When he emerged, he was ready to run a kingdom. Here's what I want you to see. God will use your waiting room as a classroom. The very place where you feel stuck is where God is developing the character you'll need for your assignment. David learned to worship in the caves. He learned to lead misfits and turn them into mighty men. He learned to inquire of the Lord before making decisions. These weren't lessons he could have learned in Saul's palace. Think about it. If David had become king immediately after Samuel anointed him, he would have been a teenager with a title but no testimony. He would have had authority without the internal infrastructure to sustain it. The caves gave him both a history with God and a maturity that made him dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. Your delay is not your denial. Your waiting is not your wasting. God is working even when you can't see it, especially when you can't see it. I've watched this principle play out again and again. The entrepreneur who couldn't get funding for 5 years, that delay forced them to refine their business model until it was bulletproof. The person who kept getting passed over for promotion that season developed in them a work ethic and expertise that eventually made them irreplaceable. The single person waiting for marriage, that time alone with God created a spiritual depth that would become the foundation of their future family. You see, God isn't just interested in getting you to your destination. He's committed to making sure you're the right person when you arrive. He's more concerned with who you're becoming than with where you're going. Because the wrong person in the right position creates chaos, but the right person in any position creates transformation. David's caves were his seminary. His wilderness was his university. His years of running were his residency program. And when he finally sat on the throne, he was ready not just positionally, but internally. So if you're in a cave season right now, don't despise it. Don't waste it wishing you were somewhere else. Extract every lesson, develop every gift, deepen every spiritual discipline, because God is preparing you for something that requires exactly what you're learning right now. That's why delays aren't denials, they're developments. Every season where you feel like nothing's happening is actually the season where everything is being formed. The roots are growing deeper. The foundation is being secured. The character is being refined in the furnace of patience and perseverance. I've watched this principle play out in my own life countless times. Seasons when I thought God had forgotten me were actually seasons when He was preparing me for assignments I couldn't yet imagine. Delays that frustrated me were protection from opportunities I wasn't mature enough to steward. Waiting periods that tested my faith were actually establishing the very foundation upon which my future would be built. And here's what I've learned. You cannot rush your preparation. You cannot microwave maturity. You cannot shortcut the process that produces genuine character. The tree that grows slowly in challenging conditions develops stronger wood than the tree that shoots up quickly in perfect conditions. One can weather the storms. The other breaks at the first strong wind. So if you're in a season of delay right now, shift your perspective. Stop asking, when will this end? And start asking, what am I meant to learn here? How is this season shaping me? What gift is God developing in me right now? Because I promise you, nothing is wasted. Not one prayer, not one tear, not one moment of faithfulness in obscurity. Every act of obedience in secret is being recorded in heaven. Every choice to maintain integrity when no one was watching has been building your capacity for influence when everyone will be watching. God is getting you ready. The question is, are you cooperating with the process or resisting it? Are you staying faithful in the preparation, or are you so focused on the promise that you're missing the point of the present? Your destiny isn't just about what you'll do, it's about who you'll become. And becoming requires time. It requires testing. It requires the kind of preparation that can only happen in the hidden place, in the waiting room, in the seasons that don't make sense yet, but one day will make perfect sense. Keep growing, keep learning, keep developing. Your preparation is not in vain.